Long before religion told us the story of Adam and Eve, nature has written her own story, not in scripture but in our cells. Every one of us carries the genetic whispers of two ancient humans, mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosome Adam. They weren't the first man or woman, neither a couple in paradise. Yet through them, the unbroken line of all living humans flows. Their story bridges science and theology, a tale of survival, evolution, and shared ancestry that challenges us to ask, who are we and what does it truly means to be part of one living human family? In the Bite Size today, we'll explore this topic. Watch the video till the end. If you are seeking clarity in the core concepts, fundamental principles, and basic beliefs of all religions, history, and philosophy, you have come to the right place. Welcome to my channel, History, Religion, and Philosophy Bite Size. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Every cell in our body carries a tiny instruction manual called DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA is a long molecule made up of four chemical letters A, T, C, and G, which form a code that tells the cell how to build and maintain the body. This DNA is not floating around loosely, it's tightly packed into thread-like structures called chromosomes. Humans have 46 chromosomes arranged in 23 pairs, one set of 23 from the mother and one set of 23 from the father. The first 22 pairs are called autosomes or somatic chromosomes. They contain genes that determine almost everything about us: our height, hair color, metabolism, and thousands of other traits. The 23rd pair is different. These are the sex chromosomes, which determine biological sex. Females usually have two X chromosomes, while males have one X and one Y. The purpose of the bite-sized videos is to break down complex concepts into simple and easy to understand narrations. It requires a lot of effort and research. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so we can spread the message as much as possible. Unlike the autosomes, which are nearly identical pairs, the X and Y chromosomes are quite different in size and gene content. Together, these 46 chromosomes hold the entire genetic blueprint that makes each of us unique, a complete biological story written in every cell. When scientists talk about mitochondrial Eve, they are not describing the first woman who ever lived, nor the mother of all humanity in a biblical sense. She wasn't alone, and she certainly wasn't the only woman of her time. In fact, she had parents, siblings, and lived among thousands of other humans. What makes her special is that she represents the most recent common ancestor of everyone alive today along the maternal line, the unbroken chain of mothers passing genes to their daughters. Homo sapiens have existed for roughly 300,000 years. Genetic studies suggest that mitochondrial Eve lived about 150,000 to 200,000 years ago, most likely in Eastern Africa. She wasn't unique in her generation, but over time, every other maternal lineage eventually disappeared, leaving only hers intact. So what exactly does it mean to be the most recent common ancestor, or MRCA? Simply put, an MRCA is the last individual from whom all members of a group descend through a specific line. In our own family, your mother is the MRCA of you and your siblings. Your grandmother might be the MRCA of you and your cousins. On a global scale, mitochondrial Eve is the MRCA of all living humans through their mothers. Most of our DNA is stored in the cell nucleus, tightly packed into 23 pair of chromosomes. Each generation, these chromosomes are reshuffled through a process called genetic recombination, which mixes DNA from both parents. Because of this constant mixing, nuclear DNA become a patchwork of countless ancestors, making it impossible to trace a single pure line of descent for long. But mitochondria tell a different story. Mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cells. What makes them extraordinary is that they contain their own DNA, called the mitochondrial DNA. Scientists believe mitochondria originated more than 1 billion years ago as free-living bacteria that formed a partnership with early cells, a relationship so successful that it became permanent. Unlike nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA is inherited only from the mother. When a sperm fertilizes an egg, nearly all of the sperm's mitochondria are destroyed, leaving the embryo with mitochondria from the egg alone. This means that the mitochondrial DNA passes from mother to child almost unchanged, generation to generation. The only change comes from tiny random mutations that occur over time. These mutations act like genetic timestamps. By comparing them across modern populations, scientists can trace maternal lineages backward through history. When they followed these branches to their point of convergence, they arrived at a single woman whose mitochondrial DNA is the ancestor of every human alive today, the so-called mitochondrial Eve. Now, this doesn't mean that she was the only woman alive in her era. Many women lived and bore children, but over tens and thousands of years, their direct maternal lines ended, usually because they had no surviving daughters. Eventually, only one continuous line remained. This process, where one genetic lineage became universal as others fade away, is called genetic fixation. Eve's mitochondrial DNA became fixed in the human population purely by chance through the survival and reproduction of her daughters and their daughters after. Mitochondrial DNA is not completely static. It mutates roughly once every 70,000 to 100,000 years. These slow, predictable changes have allowed scientists to map humanity's great migrations. By studying regional variations in mitochondrial DNA, we can trace how our ancestors spread out of Africa, branched across continents, and adapted to new environments. These mutations appearing in the mitochondrial DNA are called haplogroups. Scientists have identified several major mitochondrial haplogroups labeled L0 through to L6, all of which are found in Africa, the cradle of humanity. Among these, one lineage, L3, plays a particularly important role. Around 60 to 70,000 years ago, a small group of humans carrying this L3 haplogroup left Africa. Their descendants gave rise to two new branches, M and N, which eventually spread across Asia, Europe, and the rest of the world. Every person living outside Africa today carries mitochondrial DNA that ultimately traces back to this L3 lineage. Altogether, research have mapped roughly 25 major mitochondrial branches across humanity, each representing a significantly evolutionary divergence. When these branches are linked together, they form a vast family tree that leads us all the way back to a single woman who lived in Africa around 150,000 to 200,000 years ago, the mitochondrial Eve. Because mutations in mitochondrial DNA occur at a fairly steady rate over time, scientists can count how many mutations separate different lineages and then work backward to estimate when they share a common ancestor. In other words, each mutation is like a tick on a biological clock, helping us measure time in generations rather than years. So mitochondrial Eve is not a mystical figure or the literal first woman, but a scientific symbol, the living link uniting all humans through their maternal ancestry. Her story bridges genetics, evolution, and philosophy, reminding us that the breadth of diversity of cultures, languages, and nations, we all share a single origin, a quiet inheritance written in the powerhouses of our cell, whispering that humanity is quite literally one family. Let's look at the story of Y-Chromosomal Adam now. Just as every person carries the mitochondrial DNA of an ancient mother, every man carries a small piece of genetic history from an ancient father, a man scientists call the Y-chromosomal Adam. To understand this, we need to recall how sex chromosomes work. Women typically have two X chromosomes, while men have one X and one Y. The Y chromosome is what triggers male development, and it is passed exclusively from father to son. In most of our 22 pairs of autosomes, the non-sex chromosomes, genetic material from the mother and father recombines and mixes each generation, but the Y chromosome is different. During sperm production in men, the X and Y chromosomes are not true pairs. They share only a tiny region in common. This means that unlike most chromosomes, the Y chromosome does not undergo significant genetic recombination. It travels from one generation to the next, largely unchanged, carrying nearly intact copy of the father's Y chromosome. Because of this direct transmission, scientists can trace the Y chromosome backward through time, father to son, for thousands of generations. Eventually, all male lineages converge on one man, the most recent individual whose Y chromosome is ancestral to all men alive today. He is called the Y-chromosomal Adam. Like mitochondrial Eve, Y-chromosomal Adam was not the first man nor the only man alive in his time. He lived among many others, but over tens of thousands of years, other male lines disappeared, usually because they produced no surviving sons. By random chance, only one paternal line persisted, and the Y chromosome from that lineage became genetically fixed in the human population. The Y chromosome also accumulates small mutations over time, roughly one every few thousand generations. These mutations serve as genetic markers, allowing scientists to track human migrations and population history, showing, for example, how early groups of men spread out of Africa and settled across the world. Current estimates place Y chromosomal Adam somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago, most likely in Africa, not necessarily in the same place or time as mitochondrial Eve, but representing the paternal counterpart to her maternal legacy. Together, these two genetic lineages, one through mothers, one through fathers, tell the intertwined story of our shared human ancestry. Over tens of thousands of years, small random mutations occur in this Y chromosome. These mutations act like timestamps, allowing scientists to identify different paternal lineages or haplogroups. There are about 20 major Y chromosome haplogroups labeled A through T, and each one represents a branch in humanity's paternal family tree. Men who share the same haplogroup share a common male ancestor somewhere in the past. By comparing these mutations and using what's called the molecular or mutation clock, geneticists can estimate how long ago two lineages diverged. Because mutations occur at a roughly constant time, the number of genetic differences between groups tell us when their paths split. Tracing these lines backward, all known haplogroups converge to a single man who lived roughly 200,000 to 300,000 years ago in Africa, the Y chromosomal Adam. The story of humanity doesn't stop with mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam. Our species Homo sapiens emerged in Africa about 300,000 years ago, part of a much older family tree. If you look further back than mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam, we find earlier common ancestor that connect us to human species. For instance, around 800,000 years ago, our ancestors diverged in separate lineages that later produced both modern humans and Neanderthals. Go back about 6 million years and we meet a common ancestor shared by humans and chimpanzees, our closest living relatives. Further still, at roughly 1.5 billion years ago, the ancestors would have been a primitive single-cell organism that also gave rise to the ancestors of plants, fungi, and animals. In a real biological sense, the roots of your family tree extend not just to the ancient humans, but to every living thing on Earth. If we keep tracing that life back far enough, around 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, we arrive to what scientists call Luca, the last universal common ancestor, a single-cell organism from which all life on Earth ultimately descends. In the language of faith, Adam and Eve symbolize our beginning. In the language of science, mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosomal Adam reminds us that our origins are written not in myth, but in our very cells. They were not the first humans, yet through them the threads of all humanity are woven together. Whether told by scripture or by science, the message is the same, that we are all one family bound by shared ancestry that stretches deep into time, reminding us how closely connected we truly are.